You don't ask the professor to be brief, do you?
Okay, first, you had an interesting blog a couple of years back on good inequality and bad inequality. You've already touched on good inequality, actually, because you talked about it in the context of teachers. You said, in fact, that one of the problems was we underpay our good teachers, and essentially the notion that there's too much pay compression means that there is not enough good inequality. But most people, when they think about inequality, usually think about the bad inequality. They're thinking about people getting left behind. When you started 20 minutes ago, you said, you know, one of the things that motivated you to get into economics was concern about poverty and bringing the bottom up. So talk a little bit about the bad inequality, what its causes are, and what we can do about it.
Well, good question, Eddie.
And you have 3 minutes.
That part isn't as good. Let me try to be brief. You know, all these are big topics, so I'm saying a lot, but they're big topics. On the bad, there are many sources of bad inequality. Every time somebody who has the capacity to do better, earn more, and is prevented from doing so, that's bad inequality. All right. Every time somebody gets special privileges, let's say from the government in particular, they're given a spectrum, and they don't have to buy it, they're given it. That's bad, and they make a lot of money, that's bad inequality. Every time somebody of good ability, coming from a poor family, doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the parental guidance or neighborhood guidance to make full use of their potential human capital, and they end up with poor jobs. That's bad inequality. And I can go on and on with what's bad inequality. So there are many sources of bad inequality. Everybody recognizes there are a lot of sources of bad inequality. What people don't recognize is that there is good inequality. In a sense, inequality, I mean, it could be good from a moral reason. I'm not going to get into the moral aspects of it. These are interesting and deep questions, and I have strong opinions about them, but let me avoid getting into those. But just into the fact as you said, we want to get good teachers. Well, yeah, some people go into teaching because they like teaching. They'll like it even more usually if they get paid more. All right, so a person could be a good high school teacher saying, well, if I go in, I'll make so-and-so salary. Okay, yeah, I like teaching. If I go, I take my talents, not to Long Beach, I take my talents to, let's say, becoming a professor, or becoming a doctor, or a lawyer, or so on, I'll make 5 times that amount. Well, I'm making a trade-off. That's what economics is about, trade-off. My trade-off is I'm not going to become a good teacher. So you need inequality to give people the right motivation to do the right thing. That's how an economic system operates. If it's operating well, it doesn't matter whether it's a market-based system or a centrally planned system. You have to create inequality to have people make the adjustments. The process of these adjustments will reduce the amount of inequality you end up with. But for a period of time, maybe forever, you need inequality. So it's a good inequality that people aren't willing to recognize as being important. And I gave examples where it's, at times you need the inequality. Higher earnings for college graduates will attract more people into college education. You can speed up that process, but it will attract more people. You take a policy, we're going to take away all that higher income. I remember I visited China in 1981. Quick story, it won't take a long time. I visited China in 1981. I visited factories. And I say, what are you earning? I had somebody translate. They say, well, we're earning this amount. And I go to another worker, a high level job. What are you earning? Same amount. And a third person, what are you earning? The same amount. Well, China, nobody wanted to work hard. Nobody wanted, you started the field of personnel economics. Well, there's a good example. Nobody worked hard. they wouldn't even come to work because they couldn't be fired. I mean, with that type of equality, it's a invitation to ruining a country. And they did a pretty good job of ruining the country until they started recognizing you need to motivate people. So you look at the rate of return in China now. In the early 1980s, the rate of return in college education was about 1 or 2%, as far as one can calculate it. Now, it's quite high again. What has happened? You're booming your enrollments in higher education. That's a major force, I think, in leading to China's progress over the last 20, 30 years.
Thank you. Let me shift gears completely. We don't usually ask you, or me for that matter, to speak about macroeconomic or monetary policy, but given what's been going on in Washington with the Federal Reserve right now and sort of the surprise, I guess, that the markets saw last week, what's your thought on what Fed policy should be, how independent should they be, and whether they are on the right course right now?
Well, I think they should be independent. I mean, I've seen a lot of countries where the Fed was an arm of the government, and I thought that it generally led to a poor monetary policy. In every country, the Fed is going to be heavily influenced by the government and so on. You can't avoid that. Every central bank is influenced by the government, but you want to give them as much independence as you can possibly get. As I look at, I'm going to preface this, so it's going to take some time. It's not going to take a lot of time, let me say. Economics, when I was a student of economics, my first interest was macroeconomics. I studied with Milton Friedman. I co-ran the monetary workshop at the University of Chicago when I was a junior person in Chicago before I went to Columbia University. So I always felt, look, as an economist, I can talk about macroeconomics, I can talk about microeconomics. I may not know as much about each of these subjects, but I don't think economists should say, I'm a microeconomist, and you talk about monetary policy, and gee, I go to sleep, I don't know anything about it. Unfortunately, the profession is becoming that way. I think every good economist should have at least some opinions about each of these. And I have strong opinions about monetary policy. I supported strongly QE1. I thought we had a crisis. You were in the middle of that crisis when you were in Washington, and the Fed took some very strong and important actions. I have been a critic of QE2 and QE3. I haven't been convinced by any evidence that I've seen that's been valuable. People say we can't stop buying 80 billion or so bonds a month because the economy will get worse. What's the evidence that the QE2 and QE3 have been important factors in promoting growth in the economy? I mean, it's highly controversial. The evidence is weak, if it exists at all. Maybe someday we'll have some judgment on that. I think we have to we should have started already, stopping that policy and trying to make an adjustment where the Fed is not keeping interest rates as low and so on. I think it was a big mistake. Maybe there are reasons we don't understand that are not public, why the Fed, which had announced it was going to start a policy at the last minute, changed its policy when interest rates were beginning to adjust to that policy. Sure, countries were getting nervous, India and people in the United States, bond prices were falling, interest rates were rising. But that's the adjustment we have to make at some point. We have $1.5 trillion of excess reserves in the United States. Somehow we have to try to handle that. So I think the right policy going forward is to start tapering off. Maybe you don't want to do it all at once, but tapering off the purchase policies of the Fed in a short period of time, and then end the attempt to keep interest rates so low. Let interest rates begin to adjust. And I think the Fed will then have, at some point, if the U.S. regains its growth rate that we should have had. We've had a very slow recovery, the slowest recovery from a recession, despite all the Fed's policy. some point, hopefully we'll get a fast recovery. We'll then have an inflation problem. Potentially, the Fed will have to fight that inflation problem. You want to give the tools to the Fed at that point, the tools to fight it. So, yes, we made mistakes in my judgment. We should be